great pleasure to welcome all of you to the first of the series of lectures that we plan to organize to commemorate the birth centenary of one of the most illustrious sons of this country, Sri R D Tata. Excellency Governor, and also Professor Menon. Thank you.
Excellency, the Governor of Karnataka, Director of NIAS, Dr. Kasturirangan, and the distinguished previous directors, Dr. Raja Ramanna and Dr. Rodam Narasimha, and many distinguished friends of mine from very old days, in a certain sense, whom I see all around here, and all those who have come for this talk here, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Kasturirangan for his very warm introduction, and the things that he has said brings back many old memories, particularly of Dr. Dhawan, as he just mentioned. This is a unique occasion for me to pay personal tribute to Mr. R D Tata, whom I addressed as J for about 3 decades. Since I am giving the talk at an institution which was entirely conceived of by him. That's what Dr. Kasturirangan just said. And I am deeply grateful to Dr. Kasturirangan for this invitation to be here today to give this talk. Because I will tell you a little more about NIAS itself a little later in this lecture. Jay was truly a colossus who walked in our midst, but a gentle colossus at that. He was not only admired and respected, but greatly loved, because he was deeply human. Jay was a generation older than me, but there was no difficulty whatsoever in my interacting closely with him. He was always kind, and I always felt good and uplifted after meeting him. He was a good listener, but asked always penetrating questions. He was self-deprecating, and in many ways a person of great humility, a quality which grows with greatness. Dr. Kasturirangan has just referred to one of his quotations about humor in the letter he wrote to Rajaji. He actually enjoyed jokes, and he actually also wrote it down in a little book which he kept with him. Now, normally I'm not very good at that, at telling jokes, because I somehow laugh along with the telling of it. But on one occasion I said it with deadpan face when we were together. Rustam Choksi was the other person there. And Jay roared with laughter. That's the only word I can use. He really enjoyed it. And immediately he says, I must put it down. And so it is somewhere in that book of jokes, a joke I cracked with him. But he was also, in that sense, a person who loved pranks. Now, I'm not going to give you instances of it, but there are many that I have not personally seen, but people have told me about, particularly in the boardroom lunches at Tata's. There were many facets to Jay's personality, interests, accomplishments, and the legacy that he has left behind. As head of Tata's, he had an undoubted position of leadership in business and industry of the 20th century India. The diversity of activities under this umbrella in terms of areas is truly amazing. Many represented wholly new initiatives when embarked upon, often involving advanced technologies of that time. Jay was constantly looking out for new leadership. He discovered and nurtured leadership. Perhaps that was his greatest single quality. This was intrinsic to his philosophy. These leaders took new initiatives, opened up new industrial avenues, became household names in their time. And they had the fullest confidence that Jay would be supporting them in what they did. All was not a bed of roses. He faced many ups and downs in the various business enterprises. There are detailed accounts of this in relation to business. In dealing with these, he never sacrificed integrity. And I think this is something we should always remember, integrity. I can tell you many stories about that. Which is always the highest order. He maintained the finest relationships with labor. For him, business and industry was not a means for self-aggrandizement, but for national development. All these derived from M G K Tata, who was his role model. Apart from business and industry, he was imbued with a great spirit of adventure, most significantly manifested by his foray into aviation, starting with his acquaintance with Louis Blériot. First personally and directly, and who can forget the first flight from Karachi to Bombay via Ahmedabad, launching Tata Airlines, and the historic repetition of it 50 years later. And through an airline which all of us in India and many abroad learned to love and use when he led it. He loved speed and enjoyed watching motorcar races, particularly at Le Mans. He had a tremendous sense of curiosity and an intuitive understanding concerning technical matters, whether it would be aviation, automobiles, energy, chemicals, information technology, or steel. A few things will come out as I proceed with this talk. Each of these initiatives would have justified his standing among the great. But to cover such a multifaceted personality and achievements would be truly impossible in any single talk. Perhaps India was unique in many ways compared to anything that happened elsewhere in the world at that period. In the extraordinary leadership that was thrown out, that had a mix of long-range vision, extraordinary wide-based intellectual abilities, idealism, sacrifice, commitment, and integrity. And all the basic qualities that form the bedrock of all religions. And Jay represented all of this. But always insisted he was an ordinary human being with whims, likes, temper, dislikes, weaknesses, warts and all. That was India at its best. And each leader of that period was an icon. And it is possible to give the list of those people. And there is nobody around in the country today who matches them. I do wonder why we do not have such role models in the country today. In this talk, I shall concentrate on an aspect not so well known or talked about, which is the decisive contributions made by Jay to the promotion and nurturing of science and higher education in India. His interest in this direction roughly coincided with the support he extended to Homi Bhabha in 1943-44. My attempt is to bring out in one place all his efforts relating to this one area, in an attempt to focus on his motivations, thought processes and insights on these matters that few know about or appreciate, overawed as they are by the breadth and greatness of all else that he achieved. Jay was not a practicing scientist, but he understood the philosophy of science and the importance of pure science in a more fundamental conceptual sense than any other of his contemporaries in business and industry. And this will be clearly seen from a quotation of his later in this talk. The Indian National Science Academy has a special arrangement under which, and I quote, persons who, in the opinion of the Council, have either rendered conspicuous service to the cause of science or whose election would be of signal benefit to the Academy could be elected to the fellowship. Unquote. In the history of the Academy since 1935, only 4 individuals have been made fellows under this clause. They are Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi, R D Tata and Satish Dhawan. To me, it's no surprise that Jay would figure in this category, where no other businessman or industrialist has figured before or since. Jay was the only person in his areas of business, aviation, industry, philanthropy, and related areas of economic development to be awarded a Bharat Ratna. And I'd like to talk a little about the origins of all this, which was Jay's support for Homi Bhabha, origins of TIFR, and of the atomic energy program. Homi Bhabha, while working here in Bangalore at the Indian Institute of Science on a position created for him by the Sir R D Tata Trust, felt that there was need for large numbers to be trained in the newly developing areas in mathematics and nuclear science. He spoke to Jay about his wish to establish an institute of fundamental research in India and wrote a letter to him on this matter dated 19th August 1943. He was encouraged by Jay, who wrote back, and this is the original letter. From what you say in your letter, it is evident that there is scope for rendering valuable service to the country and to the cause of scientific research in India. The advancement of science is one of the fundamental objects with which most of the Tata trusts were founded. Unquote. Homi wrote on 12 March 1944, as advised by Jay, a formal letter to Sir Saurabh Saklatwala, chairman of the Sir Saurabh Tata Trust, in which he proposed the setting up of an institution which has since become the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. There's a remarkably prophetic letter by Homi Bhabha, and I won't go into that part at this stage, because it underlines his entire philosophy relating to the need for energy, the need for self-reliance, and the manner in which India will need to grow manpower, personnel capabilities, human resources for the purpose. And this prophetic letter contains many of the basic guidelines which define his way of functioning throughout his life. With the dynamic support of Jay, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research came into being in June 1945. But exactly at that time, Jay made an effort to get support for this venture from a friend who was a wealthy industrialist. And he wrote to him, and I quote, "I sincerely believe that this institute can make a great contribution to the scientific knowledge of mankind. You may perhaps feel that advanced physics, mathematics, astrophysics are particularly abstract subjects, research in which it is unlikely to produce material or practical results within a reasonable period of time. I should, however, like to point out that most of the great practical advances in science and therefore in industry have had their origins in fundamental research, without which they would have been impossible or would have been long delayed," unquote. Jay would never have written such a letter if he was not personally and completely convinced. His conviction as expressed in this is important for the scientific community today. When the new buildings of TIFR were inaugurated by Jawaharlal Nehru in 1962, and by that time Homi had obtained for the institute the fullest backing of Jawaharlal, whom he called Bhai, Homi made his famous remark, quote, "This institute was a cradle of our atomic energy program," unquote. But he also went on to say, and I think this is important, we must remember that today, a philosophy which Homi and Chiardi shared. I quote, "The support of such fundamental research and of an institution where such research can be carried out effectively is of great importance to society. Paradoxically, it has an immediate use in that it helps to train and develop, in a manner in which no other mental discipline can, young men of the highest intellectual caliber in a society, into people who can think and analyze problems with a freshness of outlook and originality, which is not generally found. Such men are of the greatest value to society." And I think that is a quotation of great relevance to us. Homi Baba himself, Vikram Sarabhai, P.C. Malanovis are all striking examples of this in this country. And there are many more in many other countries whom I can quote. All this came about because Jay had intuitively understood the importance of basic science, that it lay in ways far beyond high quality papers, discoveries and new understanding relating to nature. I've had many discussions with Jay on this matter in the years thereafter. This was particularly when I was director at TIFR and he was chairman of the Council of Management. We were at that time embarking on programs of significant importance to defense. These related to strategic electronics in the fields of computer science and microwave engineering. There were also other projects in applied science and technology. While Jay was happy that we were doing something of relevance to the country, he was equally concerned that we should not, in the process, dilute our thrust relating to fundamental research at the frontiers of science. I had to assure him that we would not. I also reminded him that Homi Baba had used TIFR for initiatives that would kickstart the atomic energy program. As an aside, I should mention that Jay was tremendously interested in technology, and more particularly innovation in all spheres, something different from pure technology development. And I have the feeling that he was kind to me because all our conversations were about advances in science and about the developments of technologies, particularly those relevant to India. Whilst Homi Baba's familial connections with the Tatas was important, to me the affinity between Homi and Jay was much deeper. It arose out of a fundamental sense of respect each had for the other. Jay has remarked and I quote, "It has been a source of great satisfaction to me that I was able to play a part, however small, in helping Homi Bhabha to launch a program which led to his magnificent achievement in making India, in a mere 2 decades, virtually self-reliant in nuclear science. Scientist, engineer, master builder, and administrator, steeped in the humanities, in art and music, Homi was a truly complete man." Unquote. Equally few realize that Jay was also gifted in more ways than being a great leader of business and industry. A pioneer in aviation, he was also very fond of poetry, both French and English. He enjoyed music, and his sister Rodabe remarked on his sensitivity and proficiency in playing the piano as a child. He had an excellent ear for music, but he said later that moving around from place to place prevented him from pursuing his interest in music on the piano. And there was also not the time available to practice regularly and rigorously. I remember him remarking to me on one occasion, "Goku, I wonder how Dr. Ramanna manages to find time with his heavy multifarious commitments to practice on the piano, which he plays so well." Raja, that is for you from Jay. Unquote. Jay was not a great visitor of art museums of the world, in contrast to Homi. But he also deeply appreciated good art. The magnificent collection of the Tatas is illustrative of this. In his support for the National Center for the Performing Arts, a proposal that was put forward by Homi's brother Jamshed, which was initially viewed with skepticism in the Sardar Tata Trust, Jay argued, and I quote, "Whilst we want to build a prosperous society, we do not want it to be merely a materialistic consumer society." Unquote. From the early beginnings of TIFR, Homi Bhabha went on to set up the Atomic Energy Program of India, with the Atomic Energy Commission in 1948, the Department of Atomic Energy in 1954, and the establishment at Trompé, now named after him, in 1954. But I shall now refer to another area of great relevance to society, which is also at the frontiers of modern medicine and of science, namely cancer, in which the Department of Atomic Energy has played an important role. But some of the pioneering thoughts in this came from Jay. Lady Meherbai Tata died of leukemia in 1931. Her husband, Sardar Tata, who had a basic desire to contribute to areas of human health, decided to focus on the treatment of cancer. Originally, in consultation with the government of Bombay, it was planned to establish a radium service in Bombay, with the Sardar Tata financing it completely. Just as happened to Jamshedji Tata in the case of the steel plant and of the Indian Institute of Science, Sardar died in 1932 before the project could materialize. On the basis of later discussions, it was agreed to set up a hospital in which not only radium service, but all other methods of treatment would become available. By late 1930s, the concept of the hospital was finalized. It was opened in 1941. In 1939, there is a comment by Jay in which he emphasizes the importance of ensuring the combination of medical service, education and training, and research. It was Jay who emphasized the importance of bringing in the finest expertise in the world initially, and this resulted in the linkage with the Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York. Two outstanding surgeons from there stayed at the hospital for several years and trained a new generation of brilliant surgeons. Jay had emphasized that this is the only way technology can be transferred to our country. and furthermore, that the Tata Memorial Hospital should play a major role as a catalyst for cancer treatment in India. One can see a similar situation which took place in the field of atomic energy, when Homi Bhabha, with his great friendships with so many abroad, also ensured that India would benefit by having our people trained abroad, by bringing in some of the finest brains elsewhere in the world, and kick-starting the whole program. And in each of these cases, once one got going, there was being no need for any further inputs from anywhere else. But Jay envisaged as early as 1948 that radiation treatment will become more sophisticated with increasing knowledge in physics. His vision has proved to be correct with the explosive advances in nuclear medicine for diagnostic and treatment. And this was something he said in 1948. By 1957, it was clear that such a hospital could not be run by a trust. The first effort was to get it taken over by the Ministry of Health of the Government of India, which could not undertake this task. It was at that moment that the confluence of J, the Sir R D Tata Trust, Homi Bhabha, Department of Atomic Energy, and Jawaharlal Nehru came together. And as always, in the service of the nation. The Department of Atomic Energy decided to take over the hospital by analogy with the US Atomic Energy Commission, running cancer research hospitals in the USA. The hospital has not looked back since and has become perhaps the finest establishment for cancer research and treatment in this part of the world. Another area that Homi Bhabha got the Department of Atomic Energy to take responsibility for was a laboratory created by Vikram Sarabhai in Ahmedabad, referred to as the PRL, Physical Research Laboratory. Though through close rapport between Homi Bhabha and Vikram Sarabhai, from the days when they were both together at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, funds for this laboratory were provided from the Government of India through the DAE. It was at the Physical Research Laboratory that Vikram envisioned the space program, which has been a remarkable success. Whilst the atomic energy program was growing to maturity during the 60s, DAE supported the space program, which was in its infancy. In 1972, the two were separated. By then, the space program could stand on its own. Over the 3 decades gone by, the space program has now grown to maturity, proven to be highly successful, to become an activity of which this country can truly be proud. On Vikram, Jay has said, and I think it contains some of Jay's thoughts relating to the social aspects in which science has to function. And I quote, "Few men that I have known call forth more admiration and affection than Vikram Sarabhai. I think of him and Homi Bhabha as exemplars of modern India. Vikram often spoke of new attitudes and new insights that make for a new operating culture in modern India. He felt that outworn patterns of thought are an obstacle to growth and development. That if social and intellectual environment does not change sufficiently, we should continue to flounder despite the massive inputs plan after plan. If we would apply ourselves to problems, then we must first apply ourselves to people." In his stress on the principle that scientific institutions should be built around the exceptional individual rather than by following the old practice of first creating laboratories and then searching for the best men to run them, Vikram emphasizes his indebtedness to Homi Bhabha's own thinking and practice in this respect. One is again left to lament the loss to India of 2 such men in such a short period. in these critical years of our country's history, when the future happiness and prosperity of its people, and perhaps their very survival as a nation, will depend greatly on policies and decisions being founded on common sense rather than emotion, on scientific and rational considerations rather than political ones, on pragmatic and result-oriented thinking rather than ideology, India could ill afford the loss of men like Homi Bhabha or Vikram Sarabhai. Although they have gone, they have left us a rich intellectual heritage from which it is up to us to draw guidance and inspiration in the years to come. Unquote. Now this contains many, many phrases which really relate to basic principles of the importance of science, the rational approach, the need to look at what people really require, and so on and so forth. And when I look back, I find again this close rapport that existed between Satish Dhawan and Jay, and Satish Dhawan's own thinking on these very, very same matters and the same philosophy. I put these thoughts down as Jay had himself expressed them, for he was one of the finest examples of implementing these in modern business and industry in India. Jay's support for Homi Bhabha resulted in the setting up of TIFR that in turn led to the birth of India's atomic energy program. Independently, Jay had also supported the Tata Memorial Hospital and Cancer Research Center. In course of time, that also became part of the stream supported through the Department of Atomic Energy. Another great branch of the stream was the Indian space program. Little did Jay realize the magnitude of what would grow from that initial support extended to Homi Bhabha in 1943-44. Without the support provided by Jay, history could have been very different. Homi Bhabha may not have stayed on in India. TIFR may not have come into existence as it is now. And Jay's was the hand that directed fate as it turned out to be. Jay's support for science was extremely important in coming at the right time and given to the right person. As important as the programs themselves have been, the output in terms of a viable, self-generating group of trained personnel, the scarcest commodity in a developing nation, imbued with the spirit of dedication and national endeavor, enthused to maintain higher standards of scientific integrity, and setting standards of quality in all they did, has been as important. And there are very large numbers from all of these programs who today constitute leadership in India. I'd now like to talk for a few moments on those who impacted on Jay's own personality. In his foreword to the book Keynote, which is about him, Jay has remarked, and I quote, "Those who made the greatest impact on me were naturally political figures, starting with Gandhiji, who led the freedom struggle. Gandhiji was by far the greatest personality, and to this day, the most extraordinary human being I've ever met. Inspired in me, as in most people, a mixture of awe, admiration and affection, combined with some skepticism about his economic philosophy. Whilst I usually came back from meeting Gandhiji elated and inspired, but always a bit skeptical, and from talks with Jawaharlal fired with emotional zeal, but often confused and unconvinced, meetings with Vallabhbhai were a joy, from where I returned with renewed confidence in the future of our country." Unquote. Jay has often referred to Jawaharlal as the heroic knight in armor who awakened in me some of the passion and fire that burned within him. He was particularly fond of Jayaprakash Narayan, for whom he had developed an unbounded liking and admiration. However, he reserves his heartfelt admiration for Homi Bhabha. And I must again quote what he has said. Politicians were not the only distinguished people it was my good fortune to know and to be associated with. The most outstanding of the distinguished men I have known was undoubtedly Homi Bhabha. In addition to the unique intellectual gifts nature had bestowed on him, he was, in the mold of Jamshedji Tata, a visionary with boldness, relentless energy and drive to convert his vision into reality. Homi was one of those who made me believe that some men in human history are born with a stamp of predestination on them, which leads them to accomplishments beyond ordinary human capabilities. Unquote. But to me, from all that has been written on him and my own personal interactions with him, his role model was undoubtedly Jamshedji Tata. He was inspired by him and made every effort to emulate him. And in many situations, the touchstone by which he judged himself was, what would Jamshedji Tata have done in those circumstances? I'd now like to talk a little while on his views on higher education. Jay was far more concerned about higher education than most people realize. He, of course, was always keenly conscious of a missed opportunity for formal higher education in his own life. He has remarked that he would have gone on to be an engineer. That's what he wanted to be. But for personal family reasons, he got inducted into the Tata management at a relatively young age. However, he always thought deeply about issues relating to higher education. And on this topic, two particular institutions come clearly to mind, both in Bangalore. One is the Indian Institute of Science, and the other is this institute, NIAS. And in both cases, he has expressed his thoughts explicitly. Jay became president of the court of the Indian Institute of Science in 1955. His last address to the court was in 1993, the year in which he died. He was thus president for 38 years, bringing a continuity to the spirit of management of the institution. His addresses at IISc as president of the court, and particularly on the occasion of the Golden Jubilee and Platinum Jubilee celebrations, bring out his conviction that the vision of Jamshedji Tata, which led to the setting up of the IISc as an institution of higher learning, had turned out to be an inspired one. Jamshedji Tata had remarked, and I quote, this again is very important for us, when one sees a lot of what's written in the media and by various politicians. What advances a nation or community is not so much to prop up its weakest and most helpless members, as to lift the best and the most gifted, so as to make them of the greatest service to the country. I prefer this constructive philanthropy, which seeks to educate and develop the faculties of the best of our young men. Unquote. It was invariably in this direction that Jay's thoughts also went. Both of them had ultimately the view that science and engineering should not be compartmentalized activities by themselves in the system of higher education. There was need for considering the inclusion of humanities in the broadest sense. And I quote what Jay has said. Jamshedji was mulling over a scheme for the institute, IISc. And he thought of education not only as a means of raising the standards of living of his countrymen, but also their quality of life. Unquote. And Jay on the same topic has said, it has been said that education is what makes a man, what he is, the way he conducts himself through life, his interests, his values, his personality. The load of work imposed on young men and women pursuing advanced studies in our institute is such that they have little time or opportunity to expose themselves to literature, the arts, drama, poetry, music, history, philosophy, which though unconnected with their study or research work, are essential elements in the makeup of a civilized, liberally educated person such as M G K Tata had in mind, unquote. In his very first address as president of the court of IIC in 1955, Jay made an important point that science and scientific institutions in this country should always keep in mind, and that is cooperation with industry and industrialists. And he said, I am more concerned with the efforts of the institute to make itself felt, to give industrialists and governments the confidence that their problems can be effectively handled here. Credibility and confidence with industry and government is what he was talking about. His thoughts were not only on general issues, he also spoke in the same address on technical issues in areas of opportunity. And I just give you two quotations with regard to the Indian Institute of Science, 1955. As recently emphasized by Dr. Bhabha, technical problems still need to be overcome in the practical development and application of atomic energy. These lie largely in the fields of metallurgy, chemistry, and engineering. With its varied engineering resources, this institute, that's the Indian Institute of Science, would be exceptionally qualified to play a leading part in this important work. And I hope that in the planning of our future activities, some priority will be given to preparing ourselves for the opportunities which this new field of engineering offers. Unquote. On a different topic, which is more specific, he has said, the development of the industrial gas turbine will, I believe, provide a great opportunity to the Institute of Service to the country. He then referred to the gas turbine and its initial application and development for aircraft propulsion and military purposes. But he went on to add, and this is what I'd like to quote, the gas turbine, however, has also much to offer as a prime mover in other fields, where it will in time usefully supplement and in some cases replace steam and diesel power. It will provide an exceptionally valuable addition to existing sources of power, especially in the countryside and in small towns. The gas turbine has also great potentialities in the field of rail traction, where in time it may well take the place of the steam locomotive. Of course, we've gone from steam, diesel to electric, but not yet in the gas turbine area. Jay's horizon is thus extended over broad visions, policy issues, as well as technical areas of opportunity. With regard to this institute, NIAS, I'd like to, Dr. Kasturirangan has referred to it, give a little background. Jay had a good feeling for the education system in France. He knew that mathematics was a key component, not just in its own right as a subject for research, but for creating an underpinning ability in an individual to think with an analytical approach and precision, which he felt was often lacking in India. In contrast, in India, mathematics was often a subject meant for the gifted in the field, or as an adjunct for use in other fields such as banking, insurance, and finance, or regarded as a chore. Jay was particularly impressed by the Grand École system in France, the first of which was established by Napoleon Bonaparte. In particular, he discovered that they produced a very high class of output, from which was drawn the elite of the civil service in France, dealing with areas as wide as administration, industry, mining, education, and research. Jay had a study conducted on whether such an institution would be suitable for being put up in India. And for this, he put together a group of educationists from France and India. He thought that this might be a suitable tribute to Jawaharlal Nehru when he died, and had raised substantial finances for the same. Since the Grand École insisted on a high level of mathematical knowledge for admission, there were many distinguished people in this country who felt that this would make it too restrictive and elitist in India. I would not name them, but it is on record. Jay had remarked later that he should have proceeded with the project as a venture of the Tatas, like many others in higher education and science. But the idea was not one which he would abandon. 18 years later, he constituted another group to look at the requirements of the country and the role of such an institution. I had the privilege of being a member of this group, which noted that many new types of institutions had come into existence, such as the IITs, the IIMs, and the like. It was felt still that there would be a role for an institution which has since been created, which is the National Institute of Advanced Studies. It was planned as a research and training institute, but with training being restricted to shorter time periods, and not necessarily the longer duration courses run in university-like institutions. It was meant to deal with more practical problems in government, industry, and society, with mathematical rigor relating to policy making and implementation as also options. It would take note of the many new developments that are rapidly occurring as a result of advances in science and technology. And this was an institution set up wholly at the initiative and with the vision of Jay. And I believe that the finest tribute Nias can offer in this centenary year is to make this dream of R D Tata fructify in terms of transforming with mathematics, with analytical rigor, many of the woolly policy issues discussed in this country. And I can give you innumerable instances of what's happening around the country. A great deal has been written about the role of philanthropy for the high quality growth of higher education and science. I shall only provide some illustrations from elsewhere in the world concerning this matter, but few can parallel the history of the Tatas and the direction of their philanthropy in the circumstances in which they operated. This has broad relevance to a very large amount of wealth currently being generated in the country. One of the greatest philanthropists in this regard was John D. Rockefeller, who 20 years before his retirement had already decided to give away his money to worthy causes. His problem at that time was to define the causes. He was not interested in large numbers of appeals for gifts, so he decided on a few major activities. He created the University of Chicago and financed it fully, but he refused to have his name attached to this creation. All in all, he gave at that time $35 million to the university. One of the great universities of the world, in science studded with the names of many who have won Nobel Prizes, including our own Subramanian Chandrasekhar, and people like Enrico Fermi, who did the first experiments in criticality in neutron physics at that university in connection with the Manhattan atomic bomb project. It is certainly a university of which any country could be proud. He created the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in 1901 in New York. It was housed initially in the loft of a building with a budget of $20,000. Since then, the Rockefeller Institute moved into permanent buildings on the East River, endowed with more than $60 million, has grown. It has been the home of many Nobel Prizes. Rockefeller then created a trust, the Rockefeller Foundation, with an inscription on its crest which says, and I quote, "Well-being of mankind throughout the world," unquote. We tend to forget many of these things. India has ample cause to be grateful to this foundation. And any number of instances can be pointed out where what we have received has been critical. The total amount dispersed over time by this single foundation goes to well over $1 billion. Rockefeller was clear in his approach to philanthropy. It had to be directed to specific causes, normally of large magnitude, relating to education, science, and medicine. Andrew Carnegie, who made his money in steel, had embarked on a mission to give away an enormous personal fortune. In 1889, in an article entitled Wealth, he had declared his intention, "I will die poor." A remarkable concept by any standards from a very rich man, analogous to sannyas that we have in Indian culture. Except that in the latter, only the individual personally adopts the path of renunciation. In fact, Carnegie wrote that it would be a disgrace for someone to die rich. In the uproar that followed this article, Carnegie wrote, and I quote, "Mr. Astor died, in my opinion, disgraced by leaving $150 million to one person." I referred just to a few examples. These were not the only philanthropists of this type and class. There were many others, including Stanford, Guggenheim, and so on, and many in Europe. They had all acquired wealth in the wake of developments following the Industrial Revolution and the opening up of America. And there are these revolutions which take place from time to time. We have today the IT revolution, the biotech revolution coming up. There was a spirit of aggressiveness and acquisitiveness at that time. There were no codes of ethics established relating to the accumulation of wealth. It was therefore not surprising that these wealthy individuals are often referred to as robber barons. But it must also be remembered that this enormous accumulated wealth went back to the nation and to other nations in ways to benefit society, in support of higher education, of science, of art and scholarship. They set up universities, foundations, libraries and endowments. The final output was completely different from their public image of being called selfish, cruel, seeking wealth for self-aggrandizement. And this is where Jay's views relating to market forces, capitalism, business, as compared to ideologies which many follow, are so relevant. Indeed, they invented the science and art of philanthropy for large-scale public good and mastered the difficult art of giving. But this culture of giving was developed and nurtured by Jamshedji Tata and his successors based on the situation in the country, and it was not an imitation of the earlier cited illustrations. In the foreword to the book by Frank Harris on Jamshedji Tata, Jay has remarked, and beautifully stated, and I quote, "The wealth gathered by Jamshedji Tata and his sons in half a century of industrial pioneering formed but a minute fraction of the amount by which they enriched the nation. The whole of that wealth is held in trust for the people and used exclusively for their benefit. The cycle is thus complete. What came from the people has come back to the people many times over." Unquote. And Jay has never forgotten what Jamshedji had said. "We do not claim to be more unselfish, more generous, or more philanthropic than other people. But we think we started on sound and straightforward business principles. Considering the interests of shareholders as our own, the health and welfare of the employees the sure foundation of our success. His remarks on Jamshedji reflect on him. He said he had integrity, not only money-related integrity. Jamshedji had integrity of thought and mind. The final attribute was his great humanity. In total contrast today, one sees very large accumulation of wealth by individuals, families and groups, in many ways which may correspond to the law of the land, but not to the underlying spirit of these laws and ethical aspects of function. With no indication that the possessors regard this wealth as held in trust for the people, which is Gandhiji's basic philosophy. This has resulted in any number of family conflicts and disputes and forms, and often scandalous and often obscene display of wealth by the rich. They then are the role models followed by others at various levels in society not so well off. Money has thus become in its own right the purpose in life. There is also great focus on the media and the wealth of individuals. These examples corrupt the generations that follow. Jay's whole life, if you saw how he lived, if he saw how he functioned, he never flaunted wealth. Everything was back to the nation. What I have just stated might convey an impression that I am pessimistic about the future of the country. Far from it. I know innumerable examples of professionals highly trained in various areas of science, engineering, medicine and the like, who have done well in their careers and have acquired significant wealth in the process. They use this for philanthropic purposes without much fanfare. This is happening because advances in science and technology and a more open system for functioning without too many controls and restrictions has enabled good people who are educated and enlightened to create wealth which they then use for worthwhile causes. Some of these professionals are now going to the non-governmental sector and helping charitable institutions in their work. There are innumerable examples of this right here in this city. There is thus a positive ferment in society that has little to do with politics and bureaucracy. It has to do with good people who wish to do good to society. But I would still ask the creators of great wealth in the country, where are the visions, the initiatives, dreams for national development that someone like Jamshedji had or Jay had, and to which his successors have contributed so abundantly and which they nurtured so carefully? There was a time, and I'd like to talk about some new areas for a couple of minutes. There was a time when on occasion of council meetings of the Tata Institute, the council as a whole, or certainly some of its members, and particularly J. and Rustam Choksi, visited laboratories in the institute when there was some particularly new development. And they had also lunch with the faculty. Sometimes the occasion for the visit was when some dignitary was being taken around the institute. After one such visit, which was to the first computer designed and built in India, DIFRAC, early 60s, Jay wanted to know more about the field of computers. When Jay talked to Homi about this, he suggested that Jay ask me to see him on this at Bombay House, which I did. Jay started by referring to the enormous size of DIFRAC, obviously a valve-based machine of that period housed in several rooms, and wanted to know what technology developments are taking place which would change the picture completely. He was not thinking of that machine, he was thinking of the future. I told him about the rapid developments in the field of microelectronics, first with the transistor, then the integrated circuits that had just been invented, and the discussion was in the early 1960s. Jay rapidly concluded by saying this would not be the right time for an industry or foundation to invest in this country. It was very clear. Many years later, after I succeeded Homi as director at TIFR, Jay again invited me for another lunch in the boardroom with him. and asked me for a discussion a little earlier in his room. He had not given up the idea of Tata's moving into the computer field. That was still in his mind. And he kept his ideas for a long time. I then mentioned to him what I knew about global developments, and more particularly that there would be significant opportunities in hardware relating to various subsystems, perhaps not whole computers, but certainly in software. He referred to the topic in the boardroom at the lunch discussion. To cut the long story short, Tata's embarked on setting up TCS in 1968 under the dynamic leadership of F.C. Kohli. There was a joint venture with Burroughs Corporation in the USA. And I remember my visits to the USA to visit Burroughs and others around that time. Today, TCS is a jewel in the crown of the Tatas. And there are many other efforts related to hardware in various companies. Similarly, at another boardroom lunch in Tata, Jay once asked a general question. Is there anything that Tatas can do in the field of energy to meet national needs, other than what their industrial enterprises in hydro and thermal power were already engaged on? And he knew, of course, what was being done specifically in the field of atomic energy. So he posed the question to me first, since I was sitting next to him. I said there was a great deal that needed to be done, particularly relating to the appropriate mix of energies, types, magnitudes, applications, and the strategies for their utilization in different sectors. They would have to take into account the circumstances in India that are totally different from that in the advanced countries. With a poorly developed rural hinterland, where the cost of transmission and distribution is exorbitant. This is where alternative energy supply systems, particularly decentralized and renewable, could play an important role. I also added that energy, particularly of the conventional kind, was not an area where it would be wise to embark on major research and development. And I was there. Darbari Sheth offered to pick up the entire expenses connected with such an institution. The Tata Energy Research Institute was born, and since then has established a name for itself in a unique manner in its fields of electricity. I have given these two illustrations only to point out how Jay had in his mind an approach to constantly search for new avenues that would benefit the country, in which Tatas could play a role, as Jamshedji Tata always wanted. There were other occasions and other discussions on new areas and avenues of opportunity, but I shall not take more time on this. These are just two illustrations. To conclude, I'd like to make some general remarks. Lord Blackett was a frequent visitor to TIFR, a great friend of Homi and his contemporary at Cambridge in the 1930s, and who knew Jay very well. Many occasions for dinners at Jay's house when Lord Blackett was there. He had remarked that a first-class laboratory is one in which even mediocre scientists can produce outstanding work. This is because of the interactive ambience and sense of excitement prevailing, and which has been commented on beautifully by Jacques Monod, the French Nobel Prize-winning molecular biologist, in relation to his experiences at the California Institute of Technology. Much earlier, there is a story attributed to Lord Rutherford, who headed the Cavendish Laboratory in its heyday. When there was an announcement of a Nobel Prize awarded to a scientist from the Cavendish Laboratory, the press asked Lord Rutherford, "Sir, you seem to be riding the crest of a wave with Nobel Prizes won almost every year by scientists at your laboratory." Back came the reply from Rutherford, "Damn it all, I created the wave, didn't I?" That's what he did. Thus it was with Jay. He was constantly looking for those with leadership qualities. He gave them opportunities and made great men out of them. K.S. Krishnan, the great Indian physicist, used to quote a Tamil proverb, only the learned can recognize the learned. Jay was truly learned, though he never received a formal higher education. He was one of the greatest managers the country has seen, with an uncanny approach to synthesis and bringing people together, in creating teams as a family. He never went through a formal management education, but he possessed charisma and patriarchal strength that everyone could feel and knew, so that there was no need to be autocratic or dominating. Jay was a very modern man, imbued with everything that was great in the culture initiated by M G K Tata. He kept that flame burning brightly, exhibiting not only leadership, but all the needed human qualities of idealism, compassion, caring, courtesy, kindness, pragmatism, but most of all, integrity. I hope what I have said in this talk will demonstrate how much science and higher education owe to Jay. We all have cause to be grateful that such a man walked in our midst, and many of us had the humble privilege of knowing him. Thank you very much.
Or had a hand in creating. The three that he was most proud of were TIFR and NCPA, the National Center for Performing Arts in Bombay, and the last here in Bangalore that he created just 2 years, that he inaugurated 2 years before he passed away. Being the youngest, we still have some ways to go before we realize his vision fully. On behalf of NIAS, Dr. Raja Ramana, Professor Narasimha, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and all of us, I would like to thank Professor Menon for giving us this inaugural commemorative lecture on the legacy of one of our founding fathers here in the centenary year of his birth. Professor Menon's clarity of exposition is legendary, and he demonstrated it again today. Thank you, Professor Menon. Thank you also.